Dobry den. Welcome to this discussion about the Alaska Summit. What is at stake? And we couldn't have any more experts than the ones that have joined us this morning to discuss some aspects of this. I will introduce everybody and then go to questions. We have with us Ambassador Dan Fried, who was Assistant Secretary for Europe. Also now is a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, but also was our ambassador to Poland for a while. General Philip Breedlove was Supreme Allied Commander of Europe for a time and is also a teacher at Georgia Tech, which I find very helpful as he tries to convey some of the meaning of what's going on. And then Robert McConnell, who is co-founder of the U.S.-Ukraine Foundation and former Assistant Attorney General for Legislative and Intergovernmental Affairs, and coordinator for our Friends of Ukraine network, of which both General Breedlove and Ambassador Fried are members. So let's get right to it. I want to start with Ambassador Dan Fried. Dan, you are also, I didn't mention, really probably our most expert on the whole issue of sanctions. So can you walk us through what didn't happen last week when President Trump had previously announced that there was going to be a deadline for Russia? And of course, they didn't adhere to it. But nothing, well, what happened or didn't happen? Dan?
Well, what didn't happen is a new round of economic pressure against Russia, with one exception. The Trump administration did impose additional tariffs on India to punish it for its purchases of Russian oil. Now, this is a clumsy move, but the general message was useful, or it would have been useful, that we want to go after Russian revenue derived from its oil sales, and that we're going to push third countries not to buy so much. It was a bit clumsy, and there are better ways to do it, but it was a useful signal. However, Trump suddenly made so many mixed signals and started putting pressure on Zelensky to trade away territory to Putin, that the message conveyed was lost. And so Nadia, your impression that we let the deadline slip is largely accurate for that reason. And this is not the first time. Earlier this year, Trump was talking about additional economic pressure on Russia, and Putin deflected it by proposing talks in Istanbul, which we know led to not very much other than a prisoner swap. So the pattern is clear. Trump tiptoes up to the line of dropping the hammer on Russia and then backs away. The fact is, there is more the U.S. and the West could do to put economic pressure on Russia. The Biden administration did quite a bit, but there's lots of headroom to do more, particularly Russian oil sales. That is its chief export. An enormous amount of Russian income is derived from those oil sales, and there are ways to go after them. The purpose is not to zero it out immediately and maybe do damage to our own economies, but to squeeze it over time and cut Russia's war revenue. There are other things we could do too. There's a whole list of things, and you don't have to. I'm not the only one who's got lists. There are several people with lists of things the administration could do, and it needs to do them. And it needs to stop letting Putin drag this out by throwing shiny objects at Trump to try to deflect him, of which these talks in Alaska may be the latest example. I mean, there's more to say, but the bottom line is we have the ability to put pressure on the Russian economy, and we should do so.
Thank you. Phil, I referenced the fact that you teach at Georgia Tech, and I find that when I listen to you, I can see that you're a great teacher, and I'd love to take one of your classes someday. However, for today, I would ask you to talk about what is at stake in Alaska so that, well, Joe and Susie Sixpack can understand. And the reason I say that, because there are various articles that are referencing the Molotov-Ribbentrop Treaty, Neville Chamberlain and Hitler. And then this morning, I actually got an email from somebody who was saying, there's danger ahead in Alaska, and was comparing it to when President Kennedy met with Khrushchev in Vienna. These references to past historical dates are interesting, but what do they really mean, if anything? Phil?
First of all, thank you for having me on. It's great to be on with a man I respect, Ambassador Freed, and I always learn something when Bob talks. So this is all good for me as well. Um, I think that there is a lot of over consternation about trying to tie what's about to happen in Alaska to some of these past events. I don't personally put it in the category of those kinds of events. I do believe that there's a lot at stake. As Ambassador Freed has mentioned, I think that once again we had a red line and we have stepped away from the red line, and I absolutely agree with him that this is exactly the nature and the tools that Mr. Putin uses so well. He has now bought himself more time to continue to hammer the civilian population of Ukraine, and that's what he's doing. He's fighting a counter value fight, meaning that he is attacking civilians and civilian infrastructure to try to break the country. This is not about defeating the military of Ukraine. And so I would rather approach this conversation with a couple of the first principle ideas that are being discussed. And if you hear some of the reporting about what's going on in Ukraine, it is very clear to me that much of Western media is buying into Russian propaganda. Russia desperately needs the world to see them as winning in Ukraine. And I must tell you that there's a lot of military thinkers like me and others who have served long years observing and dealing with the Warsaw Pact and now the Russian Federation, and we see it very differently. May I just throw a few things out? This is a nation that had to ask North Korea to come help them to retake sovereign land from the Ukrainians. In the Kursk Oblast, Ukraine took a big chunk of land. Russia was absolutely, completely unable from dislodging Ukraine from that Russian land. And so they asked the North Koreans to come. The North Koreans sent 20,000 men, and they took a whacking. Many North Koreans lost. Numbers as high as 8 or 9,000 have been discussed. We'll never know for a while the actual facts. But the bottom line is, with the North Koreans, Russia is still unable to totally dislodge these forces from Russian land. Russia is now asking for more North Korean soldiers. Let's look on the economic side. What we now see is that Russia cannot man its own military industrial complex. And they have asked, and North Korea has sent workers to serve in the Russian factories building war materials because Russia is unable to do it. So I think we need to remind ourselves, and we need to look at what in the big picture is going on. And that is, Russia can't retake land in its own area. In the past 14 months, over 400,000 casualties, and they have taken less than 1% of Ukrainian land with 400,000 casualties. And now they're asking for more North Koreans, and they can't man their own military industrial complex. May I just tell you that? That to me and to other military people, we are simple minded and maybe we are wrong. But may I tell you that that is not a picture of a nation that is winning a war. That is a picture of a nation that is losing a war. And yet, Mr. Putin's propaganda machine is working overtime to project these tiny little gains now being made over there as a breakthrough, and they're losing again. And the fact of the matter is, that's not the case. And here's what I hope happens tomorrow and happens across the next 2 weeks. Our president is beginning, I believe, to see this in a different light. And I hope that he understands what I and other military thinkers understand, and that is that Russia is losing. And when the negotiations begin, that Russia is starting from a position of weakness at the table, not a position of strength at the table. And then, if I read The Art of the Deal correctly, our president will go to that table with confidence and impose changes on the behavior of Mr. Putin. Mr. Putin, I've said before and been repeated, is not going to stop. Mr. Putin will have to be stopped. And I think the American president has an opportunity now to start the process of stopping Mr. Putin.
Thank you. Do you want to say a word about their use of motorcycles and bicycles?
Well, so there are all manner of indications of how this army of Russia is struggling. I, in a completely different conversation, I often talk about the fact that here is a country that it was supposed to be a world superpower. And they've been trying for 11 years. People have forgotten this is an 11-year long war. This is not a 3.5-year long war. This is the third phase of an 11-year long war. Russians and Ukrainians have been dying in Ukraine since the spring of 14. This war is 11 years old. And here we are, a world superpower has been trying for 11 years to subjugate, take over their neighbor. And look at where they are. As you said, we're seeing all manner of military adaptations like motorcycles, bicycles, and private cars to get the Russian army moving around in eastern Ukraine. Don't ever underestimate the ability of Russia to bring havoc to Ukraine. We don't want to trivialize what they can do, but they are not fighting a modern maneuver warfare in eastern Ukraine. They are fighting a World War I attritional, linear, artillery-based fight, and the world has moved beyond that.
Robert, as we look to the Alaska summit, and again, sort of, is there going to be another sort of red line articulated? But previous red lines have come and gone, as has been already expressed. But let's talk a little bit about the role of Congress in this situation. Where are they exercising their role in this foreign policy issue?
Oh, wow. I didn't know you were coming there. Uh, you want to talk about a red line? I think President Trump has drawn a red line across which Congress dares not cross as it is currently acting. It's not acting. It's a independent branch of our federal government. And, take one example, the sanctions bill that has 80 some supporters, meaning it's veto proof in the Senate. It's been there now for months. And then we've had reports that, well, it's okay with the president, then, well, he'd like to hold it up. I mean, if that's brought to the floor of the Senate, it passes. Congress has a role here if it believes the president needs to do something he's not doing, they can press him to do it, and they're not doing it. He has them cowed at this point, and there's no reason for Congress not to have brought up the sanctions bill, get it through the Senate, get it to the House, and impose by law sanctions against Russia. It's amazing how little Congress is doing relating to Ukraine. Yes, there are some members of Congress that are trying to work mostly through the authorization and appropriation process for fiscal year 2026, led by Mitch McConnell, who's adding money that the president didn't want for Ukraine. But it's the Congress is a bystander, and I'm not even watching with what's going on in Alaska tomorrow. Uh, Marcy Kaptur is the only member of Congress that I have been able to find that has put out a press release saying what must not be done in Alaska. Uh, Lindsey Graham has had some, well, the president might be able to do something here and so forth. It's just Congress is a participant in the spectator galleries, and I don't even see him with pom-poms cheering the president on. They're waiting for him to take the lead, and they'll follow. Having said all that, I would like to say something about what both Dan and Phil have been talking about. I mean, red lines. I mean, it just when since 2014 has there been a red line, whether it's by President Obama or whomever, that hasn't vanished as people have gotten up to the line? Uh, Phil has said exactly what I've said and others have said. Putin is not going to stop until he is stopped. And the word is that, and it's confusing because there's so many words coming out about what people are thinking about Alaska, ceasefire, peace agreement, so on and so forth. Um, I personally don't think there's any possible success for long-term peace under a ceasefire or a peace agreement with Putin. I think he has to be defeated, or one way or another, he's going to take time and come back in to do whatever he wants in Ukraine. Um, and I will add one more thing, Phil, before we go to you. Nobody, I have seen nothing that one of the conditions for talking with Putin is that they address the abducted children. I mean, whatever number, if you want the proven number of 20,000 or Russia's number of 100 and some thousand, they have, under the Genocide Convention, what they have been doing is genocide. Period. Full score. In the United States, when you go outside the Beltway, yes, a lot of people seem to have a general familiarity with there's been children abducted, but they don't focus on it. And when in a talk you start explaining what the Russians are doing with those abducted children, the American people become outraged. But our nation doesn't act like our government is outraged. We should not, for everything in our history and everything we have stood for, we should not have abducted children anything but front and center with any demand of Putin.
So I want to pick up on something that some words that Bob just brought to the fore, and I'm sure the ambassador will grade my paper here in a minute. I think it's important to talk about ceasefire versus peace. And we all believe that ceasefire is a tool to stop the killing. But I think what we need to focus on is that needs to be a temporary thing. The goal of our efforts should not be a permanent ceasefire. This is exactly what Mr. Putin wants, because a ceasefire means that hostilities have been stopped for a short time, okay, or for an indeterminate period. Our goal is to get a situation where Ukraine can begin to regenerate, become a part of the world economy, especially the Western economy. We know they can succeed. They build some of the best airline or aircraft motors in the world. They have the ability to rebound from where they are and succeed in a massive way. The world will not take chances on Ukraine if all we have is a temporary cessation of hostilities, and they're fearful that their investments will be run over by another barrage of attack from Moscow on the civilian infrastructure. And so Mr. Putin wants a ceasefire. He wants the world to understand that he could come back at any moment and start again, as he has multiple times: 2008, 2014 once, 2014 second. Every agreement we've had, he's broken and reinitiated hostilities in Ukraine. And so I just would like everyone to focus on ceasefire is, or not focus on, that's presumptive of me. Everyone should consider the following: ceasefire stops the killing, but it is not a permanent solution. We need to get to a peace and a mechanism to enforce the peace. Once that happens, I think Ukraine takes off. The investment, the capability of the people, they're some of the most industrious, technical people in this world. And Ukraine takes off. And the real victory for Ukraine is that when Ukraine becomes a vibrant, profitable part of the West, where people are proud of their nation and have great work ahead of them, and Russia is still Russia like it is now. That's the real victory. That's the long-term victory.
Yes.
As usual, I find myself in agreement with General Breedlove. That is, a successful, free Ukraine, part of the West, part of Europe, would constitute a strategic victory for the Ukrainians, for Europeans, for the Americans, and for the free world. Putin doesn't want simply a few Ukrainian provinces. He wants all of Ukraine. He wants to dominate it. He thinks it's his. Our objective is to help the Ukrainians block him. Now, to get there, to get to that strategic success, we need to stop the fighting, and we need to provide security for Ukraine. If you stop the fighting and there's no security for Ukraine, Putin gets to invade again, which is what General Breedlove pointed out. He loves a ceasefire that he could then reverse, coming up with new excuse about Nazis in Kiev or repression of Russians or whatever fake excuse he can manufacture. Now, a ceasefire without security guarantees is simply a pause for Putin. For Putin to agree to a permanent settlement of the war, Putin will insist on Ukraine giving up territories. Zelensky shouldn't have to do that, and we shouldn't make him. I was unhappy to see President Trump earlier this week publicly pushing the Ukrainians, publicly criticizing Zelensky for not wanting to give up territory. I don't think it is our responsibility. It's not our right as Americans to tell the Ukrainians that they have to permanently give up territory. The United States has held for nearly 100 years that aggressive dictators shouldn't be able to redraw boundaries by war. We had that position with respect to Manchuria in the 1930s. We did not recognize the Soviet occupation of the Baltic states. That was in 1940. And in the first Trump administration, the then Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, issued a declaration saying, we will never recognize Russian occupation of Crimea. Those are good precedents to stand on. Now, during the Cold War and to end the Korean War, we agreed to an armistice line. We agreed to an armistice. Eisenhower agreed to an armistice in Korea in 1953 to end the war. That armistice has held generally. It's been violated by the North Koreans, but it's generally held. And under that armistice, South Korea was prosperous, became prosperous, democratic, free, and strong. That's a good model for Ukraine, I think. The line between East Germany and West Germany during the Cold War was not a permanent border. That's why the West German government could accept it. We didn't make it a permanent border. Now, a ceasefire line without security for Ukraine is exactly what General Breedlove said. That's an invitation for Putin to come back. Putin is going to resist any security for Ukraine that he doesn't control. He will insist on it. And we should have nothing to do with that. Security for Ukraine doesn't run through Moscow. We don't negotiate it with Russia. How do you provide security for Ukraine? Well, NATO membership is best. Okay, let me just say it. I think that defending Ukraine as part of NATO is much more practical than I imagined 15 years ago, because we know that because the Ukrainians, mostly on their own, with our help but not our involvement, have managed to defend themselves pretty well since the big invasion 3 years ago, and since 2014, the first invasion. But if NATO membership is not on the cards because the Trump administration doesn't want to go there, well, there are other ways to do this. And this is where I start deferring to General Breedlove. But the backing up the Ukrainians with the weapons they need, with investment to help them expand their defense industries, and frankly, working with the British and French who've offered to lead a coalition of the willing to put forces in Ukraine, might be very productive. Various ways to do this. Putin will hate it. And now I'm going back to the point that General Breedlove and Robert McConnell made earlier, which is that Trump should be able and eager to stare down Putin in Alaska. We are in a stronger position than many people realize. This is what General Breedlove said. He's right. Putin is a master of the bluff, the brag, and he's cunning and conniving. But we have cards, to use President Trump's term. We need to use them. And I think Zelensky, he might well agree to a ceasefire, but only with security for Ukraine. And we have to go a lot further than we've been willing to go so far. But I think that this is possible. And I think Trump should, look, I've been in many meetings with Russians over the years. They love to start a meeting by dangling some shiny object in front of you, some offer that sounds good and turns out to be not much. I suspect Putin will do that this time. He'll offer Trump economic cooperation, great business deals. He'll offer arms control, nuclear weapons control. He'll make all kinds of offers intended to deflect Trump from putting the squeeze on Putin to end the war in Ukraine. Trump shouldn't buy it. He should push back hard, cut Putin off, tell him that the time has come to settle this war in a way that leaves Ukraine free from future Russian aggression. I don't know that Trump will do that, but I think he could. I think he has the ability to do that. and then he could claim a win. From his point of view, if he could end the war on terms that allows Ukraine to be a free country, he could claim the victory. Fine with me. But he needs to do it. And the mixed messages this week have been discouraging, but the last few days, it seems to be maybe a little more hopeful. President Trump talked to the key Europeans yesterday. President Zelensky was on the line. Trump said the discussion was good. The Europeans publicly said the discussion was good. We know roughly what the European position is because they've issued statements about it. So we have the makings of a U.S. success if Trump pushes back on Putin. I don't know that he's going to do that. I'm pretty confident that Putin's going to come in, as I said, with dangling a shiny object. Trump should whack it back and tell him that the time has come to end this war on terms that leave Ukraine free and don't require Zelensky to give up territory. Now, lots of ways in which this could be done, but I'm not wildly optimistic about the meeting, but I believe there is upside potential if Trump will take advantage of it. But I'll be satisfied if we avoid a train wreck, missed opportunity perhaps. But I think that my worries about a train wreck are a little less severe than they were 3 or 4 days ago. Anyway, sorry to have gone on, but I've been thinking about this real hard and listening to General Breedlove attentively, as I always do.
Thank you, Dan. I think you've expressed a lot of the sentiments that many of us hold. Phil, I'm going to now switch a little bit to if there's any bright lights in all of this that has taken place over these years. It's the fact that Europe is beginning to stand up, right? That there is, in terms of even backing Ukraine. I mean, President Trump always talks about, it's Europe. No, they should be, taking the responsibility for this or that. And I think they have, even though they seem to be very mindful not to insult Trump. And so they kind of coat some of their statements. But overall, it seems that there is real leadership coming out of Europe. Are traveling constantly, visiting these various capitals in Europe. Give us your assessment of where things stand in terms of leadership from Europe, I would say.
Well, first of all, you've hit it right on the head. There has been a renaissance of Europeans taking responsibility for Europe. It started actually to a certain degree back when Russia first invaded and took over Crimea and then invaded the eastern provinces of the Donbass, Lugansk, and Donetsk. This started a change in NATO, specifically from the Wales Conference summit that started fundamentally changing the readiness of NATO's forces. And we had been in a probably 30-year procurement holiday. The forces of NATO badly needed recapitalization, but more so than anything else, they needed to increase their readiness because we were just not ready. We had been hugging the bear, and no one understood that the bear didn't want to hug. The bear was happy that we were giving him time to prepare for war, and here we are. So the bottom line is NATO has changed. And Mr. Putin always laments and says that we promised him that NATO wouldn't change. And may I just tell you that the magnificent newest members of NATO, Sweden, Finland, these these nations decided to become a NATO nation based on Mr. Putin's intransigence in Europe. He is responsible for the very thing he blames NATO for. So, may I just say that, in a large sense, NATO has started a road to being much more capable, much more prepared, but in the greatest sense, much more ready to do what it may have to do. This road is not very far traveled yet. There is a lot of work to be done, but there is great signs that it's going to happen. You all know I've lived in Germany 5 times. As a young captain, I served alongside the Bundeswehr, looking across the inner German border at the first operational maneuver group of the Soviet Union. And the army of Germany at the time was an incredibly capable force. And I think that finally now, Mr. Putin has even awakened the need in Germany to recapture capability. And that's an incredibly important and heartening decision that Deutschland has taken. And I think it's just a sign of the fact that Europeans are stepping up. And everyone seems to lament this idea that Europe wants to have its own sort of set of capabilities inside NATO and inside the European Union, and they worry about that. I don't worry about it one little bit. I celebrate it. I absolutely celebrate it. This is amazing. And we, I believe, as a part of NATO, are going to be important. And I will just close this little diatribe by saying that I'm often quoted that when asked to remark about the last 75 years of NATO, the first thing out of my mouth is the next 75 years of NATO will be more important than the last 75 years of NATO. And it is incredibly important that we, as America, stand front and center in this organization.
Let me come in to say I am in, as usual, complete agreement with General Breedlove. The Europeans have started taking their own defense seriously and building up their capabilities. This is great. Second point is that the Germans and the French have come to understand that their assessment of Russia was wrong, that they took much too benign a view. And they have realized that the Europeans who were most skeptical of the Russians, the Poles, the Balts, were right, and right all along. This view in Germany has been remarkable. The Germans have understood that the Russians are not simply focused on Ukraine, but are also focused on them. There is sabotage in Germany, Russian sabotage in Germany, and if you talk to Germans, they will acknowledge it. So this change in European thinking is real, and the change in their willingness to defend themselves is also real. A third point is that the U.S., the Trump administration, has moved a long way in a good direction on Europe. Trump was skeptical of Europe, dismissive and derisive of Europe, particularly the Western Europeans. However, the NATO summit in The Hague early this summer was a real success. The Europeans stepped up and made pledges to increase defense spending, and Trump embraced this. I think the U.S. ambassador to NATO, Matt Whitaker, did a good job pulling that summit together. It was a success. And so Trump has now had a much more favorable view of Europe in general, mainly, as I said, because the West Europeans have moved toward the East Europeans in their views of Russia. And so now Trump is consulting with the Europeans instead of dismissing them. And this might not, I didn't anticipate that this change would happen so quickly or so profoundly. So it's actually pretty good news. And I want to give credit to those people in the Trump administration who helped move the president in this direction. But of course, the real credit goes, as General Breedlove said, to the Europeans themselves who stepped up, who understood that they had to take responsibility for their own defense and had to start thinking strategically. So on this basis, it's possible to start thinking in terms of Ukraine security in ways that we could not possibly have done 20 years ago. 20 years ago, a lot of the West Europeans especially looked at Ukraine as somehow not part of our family. That mental line of the old Cold War Iron Curtain line was still embedded in the minds of a lot of West Europeans, and I think that's gone away. And it's gone away in large part because Putin has demonstrated to the West Europeans, including the Germans, how threatening Russia can be. So this is a big deal. And of course, the Finns joining NATO is terrific. General Breedlove and I have worked with the Finns over the years, and none of the Finns have ever forgotten the lessons of having to defend their country against Stalin's armies during the Winter War. They succeeded in holding off the Soviets. They have not forgotten it. You don't need to tell the Finns anything about threats coming from Moscow. So you've got a new look in European security. The Poles have stepped up. They're now a front-rank European player. Their military is growing. Their capacity is much greater than it was, and the Polish government has been part of these smaller group consultations with the Trump administration, all to the good, because the Poles understand perfectly well that Ukraine's security is also their security and their right. So these are good signs which surround the meeting tomorrow in Alaska. Without predicting a good outcome, because I don't know that we'll get one, I think that Putin is going to find himself a little more on the defensive than he would have expected a few days ago. I think he's going to try to butter up Trump. Trump shouldn't take the flattery, but should press his advantage. Sorry to go on, but there's, I've been traveling to Europe a lot, and I've watched this change in their view and wanted to spell it out for you all.
Thank you, Dan. Before going to
Lydia,
yes,
I'd like to add something here, and it's not, it's hard sometimes to push this point, but I believe that everything that Dan said about and Phil said about the Europeans and stepping up, I agree with all of that. I do personally give some credit, significant credit to Trump for pushing obnoxiously, perhaps, to raise the contribution to NATO, to do the things that need to be done and so forth. What I would like to say is he has proven that he can stare down allies and push them to do things they might not have been willing to do. He needs to stare down Putin, walk into this, whether this quote unquote summit should have happened or not, whether the preparation for a summit is far weaker than any summit we've ever heard of before. If Trump will walk in and be assertive and use all the quote unquote cards he has before Putin even gets a chance to talk and lay his card, the United States national security cards on the table and demands what he should and could demand, we might get some favorable outcome from Alaska.
well, okay, thank you. Phil, I'm going to go to you. There's a question that's come directly to you from Dmytro Anopchenko, who's a DC correspondent for Ukrainian TV, and he would like to know your opinion about the military sense to Putin's demand to withdraw Ukrainian forces from Donbass in exchange for a ceasefire. What kind of a dirty game might it be?
So I'm going to tread a little bit on the ambassador's territory, but then I'm going to finish on military territory. I think that what is happening here is very clear. Uh, Putin has lost hundreds of thousands of troops trying to take all 4 oblasts in the east. We all agree he wants more than that. But in a military sense, he's been smashing against the defenses in the Donbass region for years now, and he has been absolutely, completely unable to take the rest of those oblasts. He is now counting on the United States to give him the rest of those oblasts. This would be an incredibly bad geopolitical, geostrategic decision. We don't give him land that he hasn't taken. We don't give him land that he has taken. We never acknowledge it because just like the 3 Baltic nations, it probably will come back to us in the future. Nobody wants to live under Russia. And so we don't want to set a precedent that we're going to give him land that he hasn't taken. Geopolitical nightmare. Now, from a military standpoint, it's very clear what Mr. Putin wants. Ukraine has set up a series of about 4 major cities and strong points in a line there that are holding the line in the Donbass. Again, in the last 14 months, Putin has lost over 400,000 troops, either dead or wounded so badly they'll never fight again. 400,000, and he's advanced almost none. In the aggregate, less than 1% gain in the last 14 months at immense, unfathomable cost to his military. So now why would we give up that defensive position and allow him to move further west to a place that is not prepared? You know, it would take a year or so and a lots of Western money, a lot of money to recreate the defensive positions further west along the edges of those 4 oblasts to be able to defend in the manner that Ukraine is defending now. Strategically, military, it would be incredibly stupid to make that decision. We take away a fortified, strong, proven line of defense and have to build a new one further west. This is what Mr. Putin is counting on. He cannot defeat that line. He's smashed against it for years now, and he has not moved it very much at all. And so I really hope that the folks who are advising our president has made sure that he understands that in a geopolitical and in a military sense, this is a non-starter, that we would give Putin that land and displace an incredibly successful defensive line for Ukraine. So I hope that I've made myself very clear. I think that would be a really, really, really bad decision on multiple fronts.
Thank you. You know, trying to read President Trump is like a sort of mental, I think, whiplash. Uh, but, you know, on the one hand, he seems to understand because in the press conference, when he was talking about what Putin wants, and he said, you know, some people think that he wants all of Ukraine. And then he says, I happen to think so too. So it appears that he has some understanding, but then he reverts and so Robert, I'm going to ask you this question. You know, I forget which of our guests here was congratulating people in the administration who, you know, have supported certain strategic objectives that are, you know, positive for Ukraine and for us, frankly. Uh, you know, there's somebody who is close to the president who perhaps needs, how to say it, maybe some education as well. You know, in the previous administration, there was a lot of criticism because the vice president, who was in charge of our border, didn't travel to the border. And you know, Vice President Vance seems to play a significant role in the issue of Ukraine and cooperation with Europe. Uh, he is really refusing, I guess, to come to you. Why does he not? Why is he not willing to go to Ukraine to see firsthand what is going on? It seemed to me that in that very, I would say, tragic, unfortunate White House meeting, he seemed very defensive about when, when he was asked to come visit Ukraine. Uh, shouldn't he, if he is going to be advising the president, make that trip to get firsthand information?
Well, I don't think you believe that I have any route to influence the vice president. But why hasn't he? Well, remember in the campaign and ever since, really, his position is he doesn't care what happens to Ukraine. I mean, what he'll voice some of Trump's, the president's views at times, but he doesn't care about Ukraine. To him, it ought to just go away. It's a distraction from things he must care about. Should he go? I think he should. When in the Obama administration, Biden was supposed to be following Ukraine. How many trips did he make? I mean, whether they were successful or not, but he went. He tried. He traveled there. He visited with people and so forth. Vance is in these meetings. Apparently, he was on the Zoom call yesterday. Uh, if he wants to be a source of educated views to share with the president about Ukraine, he should go there and he should talk to European leaders about their views about Ukraine. Whatever got him to feel what he feels from his world in Ohio, it had him care virtually nothing about Ukraine. It is a big issue for the President of the United States. It is a big issue for the national security interests of the United States. And if the Vice President is going to be in those meetings, he ought to know and hopefully learn a lot more than there's evidence that he has so far. Now you've got me in trouble.
Phil, you've noted that one of our viewers is asking some questions. Actually, she's asked quite a few. Phil, do you want to take a stab at any of the question Nina has posed?
Well, she's posed a lot of very good questions, and some of them are more, I think, frustrations that our president appears to align with Putin rather than challenge Putin. And I would only offer that, as Bob has noted and the ambassador has noted, that the president seems to be taking a little different tact. I think the president is beginning to understand what I have said over and over in the press in the last 3 days, and I will say more in the next 2 days, and that is that Mr. Putin never has been a partner in trying to find peace for Ukraine. He is not now a partner in trying to find peace for Ukraine. And he, Mr. Putin, will never in the future be a partner in trying to find peace for Ukraine. And so I believe that our president is beginning to understand that. And I think our president is sympathetic to the fact that Mr. Putin may be not cooperating to the point of trying to just extend his time that he can pound on Ukraine. And I think that, the president doesn't come from the Bronx, but allow me to use the Bronx in my little declaration. I think that Mr. Putin may have actually reached the point where our president is going to go Bronx on Mr. Putin and be done with his wiles and the things that he's using to extend time. Race right up to a red line and make an offer, get a new deadline. Race right up to that deadline, get an offer and move out. I think our president is beginning to understand that Mr. Putin, once again, I love to say this, so I'm going to say it once again. Mr. Putin has never been a partner in trying to find peace for Ukraine. Mr. Putin is not now a partner in trying to find peace for Ukraine. And Mr. Putin will never in the future be a partner in trying to find peace for Ukraine. And I think as our president begins to see that himself, we're all hoping he will finally go Bronx.
I apologize. There are quite a few
one thing
questions.
about
Oh, go ahead.
one thing about that is I hope, I agree with Phil. I agree that the president shows signs of finally understanding that Putin is what he is. What I hope will not be the case, because he keeps saying it's not his war, I may walk away and so forth. I hope that in coming to a conclusion that Putin will never be a partner in seeking peace, that our president just doesn't walk away and leave it to the Europeans and back away and just say, I'm turning elsewhere. He's made sounds to that effect, and that would be a disaster, not for Ukraine only, but for the United States national security interests as well.
There are a lot of questions. Somebody mentioned, well, there's been no mention of Mark Rubio's role. Well, we could, of course, go on and talk about the various people in the administration and the roles that they are playing or not playing. I think we'll go final round, sort of closing remarks. But I would like to make the point that all this things about a land swap, and President Zelensky has said this, we're not just talking about land and geography. We're talking about people, children who have been abducted. It says about 1.6 million children are in Donbass and Luhansk. We have reports about various prisons and the horrible treatment that prisoners of war have undergone. There's much more to this idea of exchanging territory than just plain geography. There are millions of people who would be at the mercy of Russia if we agree to, quote unquote, a land swap. Quickly, I will go, let's say, closing remarks that people would like to make. I'll go in the order we started with. Dan, would you like to make a couple of closing remarks?
Sure. The U.S. has an opportunity to advance a peace in Ukraine. My expectations for the Alaska summit are under control. But Trump's position is good. And I hope he takes advantage of it rather than let Putin lead him by the nose once again. The Ukrainians deserve no less, but it is in America's national interest that Ukraine succeed. And the 20th century taught us that it is in America's interest to resist aggressive dictators around the world. We may not be interested in them, but they're interested in us. Push back and gain thereby. I hope we do.
Thank you. General Breedlove?
The ambassador made one of the most important remarks just then that can ever be made, so I'm going to repeat it. It is the U.S. national interest. It is in our interest that Ukraine succeed. Slava Ukraini.
And I am Slava. Robert?
Well, how can I follow that? I agree with both of them, and I would just say ditto. The one thing I'll add is in these equations, in talking to Putin and whatever is being demanded, do not forget the abducted children and the genocide being perpetrated upon them.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I will just also announce that we will have a follow-up webinar this coming Tuesday after this the Alaska Summit. Thank you very much.
Thank
Do
you.
побачення. Слава
До
Україні.
побачення.